old friends and new. I invite you to find your seats. Just a couple of announcements real quick this morning. First, if I haven't had the chance to meet you, if you're newer here, my name's Greg. I'm co-pastor with Melissa here, and we're really glad to have you. As always, if you want to find out more information about what's happening in the life of our church, just go to dunelandchurch.org. Also, you can sign up for our newsletter. We send stuff out. We're on the socials. You can find us there. We'll get the information to you. But make sure you introduce yourself to Melissa or I. We'd love to get to know you. Next Sunday after the service, we're going to have our next meeting for our food ministry. For those who've been part of figuring out how we're going to engage with food insecurity in our community and be part of that, we're going to take some action steps. And we invite you to join us after the service. And it doesn't matter if you've never been to that meeting before. If you're interested in finding out, just come and join us for that. And we'll enjoy some lunch together. Do we have a lunch plan yet? Probably not. Okay, potluck. Bring soup, salad, sandwiches, sweets, any of those things to share. Bring something to share. We'll do that. But before we do get to that meal, we have to talk about today's meal. This is a theme with us as a church. We like to eat, but we are enjoying a potluck after the service today. We have lots of food. Don't worry if you haven't brought anything. We're just glad you're here. Please stay and enjoy lunch with us afterwards. All right. So we're going to play a little game at the beginning of the sermon. It's one of my favorite ones that I like to see on social media, and it's called Put a Finger Down. You know this game? So you can start with one hand with 5 fingers up. And if I name something that you have done, I just want you to put a finger down. And we're going to see if anybody has any fingers left. We just go with one hand at the end of this, okay? So put a finger down if you've ever paid for a gym membership and gone months without going, even if you were still paying. Yeah, you're going to feel judged by this. It's not judging, I promise. Put a finger down if you've ever downloaded an app for diet, exercise, or mindfulness, and because you were convinced it was going to change how you lived, and you gave it up within a month. Yeah, it's real rude. Put a finger down if you've ever abandoned a New Year's resolution in the first week. Put a finger down if you've set screen limits for your phone to help you stop scrolling and then pressed ignore for today repeatedly. Careful what fingers you put down and hold up still. I know some of you are getting angry at me. That's right. Put a finger down if you ever joined a Bible study or a small group and quit within a week or two. Okay. Put a finger down if you've ever bought a book that you were convinced would change your life and you didn't read it. Now you're down to multiple arms now. I don't know. I'm just holding fingers up. I don't know. I confess to all of these things, except for probably the Bible study one. Put a finger down if you've ever cut one specific thing from your diet because you were convinced it would fix everything. Maybe it was soda, candy, alcohol, sugar, bread, and then it didn't. It's worth a try. Put a finger down if you've ever made a bargain with God that if God answered this one prayer, you would actually change. Great. Okay. And how many people have fingers left? I see lots of hands up. Oh, this is good. Okay. This is good. This is good. All right. You can put your hands down. So what's the point of that game other than making you like me less? Change is really hard. We have all of this evidence from our life that changing how we live is difficult. As a matter of fact, in many ways, you can think about the fact that your whole life up until this point has been a grand experiment in, can I will myself to change on my own? And the reality for the most part is, no, just finding some sort of internal motivation that is enough to radically change how we live and who we are. The overwhelming evidence is it's just real hard. And that's not a judgment on us. It's simply naming the human condition. If you've noticed, everybody else was going through the same sort of things you went through as we walked through that, right? The list of ways in which we have been convinced this one thing was going to fix stuff, and then it didn't. So this series that we're in called Good News People is our attempt to understand how to live as an Easter people today. How to live as a people who really believe the good news of God's love for us, that God is with us, God is for us, and trying to figure out how to actually embody that, live it out, absorb it into our life so that it's not just something we celebrated and made note of, but it's something that informs how we live each and every day. And we started this series out by talking about our mission statement as a church, right? Because our mission statement is tied into this idea of being good news people. And it's pretty simple. Our mission as a church is to cultivate God's wholeness in a broken world. That's it. That's why we exist. We are looking to cultivate God's wholeness in a broken world. And last week, Melissa talked about one of the ways in which we do that, which is welcoming all. And she gave us this great image, right, of the parable of the Good Samaritan, of taking our donkeys out into the alleys and the backwoods of the world and finding the people who have been broken by this world and practicing radical hospitality for them, bringing them into the love of God. But living into this mission and living out our values requires something of us, and that is a commitment to transformation. One of our most important values as a church is a growing life. We believe the life we've been called into as followers of God is a life in which we grow, in which we are transformed, in which we are changed. But as just reminded ourselves, if we are left to our own devices to will ourselves to that change, we're probably not going to get very far. And so the good news this morning we're going to encounter is God's plan for how we change and how we experience this and how it works differently, right, than the plans we create for ourselves. So I'm going to invite John to come up and read from us from our gospel passage from Luke today. And in the passage, we are going to get one of my favorite parables that Jesus taught. Jesus often taught with stories, we call them parables, that would take everyday life examples that people could understand, and they would often have a twist or something surprising about them to help reveal the truth of God's kingdom. And today's parable does that when you think about a growing life. So
Today's scripture is Luke 8, 1 through 15. Soon afterward, he went on through one town and village after another, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward Chusa, and Susanna, and many others who ministered to them out of their own resources. When a large crowd was gathering, as people were coming to him from town after town, Jesus said in a parable, a sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell on a path and was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on rock, and as it grew up, it withered for lack of moisture. Some fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew with it and choked it. Some fell into good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As he said this, he called out, if you have ears to hear, then hear. Then his disciple asked him, what is this parable? What this parable meant? He said, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of God, but to others I speak in parables, so that looking they may not perceive, and hearing they may not understand. Now, the parable is this: the seed is the word of God. The ones on the path are those who have heard. Then the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts, so that they may not believe and be saved. The ones on the rocks are those who, when they hear the word, receive it with joy. But these have no root, and they believe only for a while, and in time of testing fall away. As for those that fell among the thorns, these are the ones who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by the cares and riches and pleasures of life, and their fruit does not mature. But as for that in the good soil, these are the ones, when they hear the word, hold it fast in an honest, a good heart, and bear fruit with endurance.
thanks be to God. So this is one of the really rare parables that Jesus actually explains, and it's still sort of hard to understand. Even with this explanation of what's going on in the parable, there are still different ways of interpreting it and trying to make sense of it, of wrestling with what it means. But for today's purposes, we're going to look at the parable this way: that the sower, the farmer in this story, we're going to say that's God's at work, Jesus at work in our lives, and that the seed that's planted within us, the seed the farmer's doing, is the good news about God's love for us. This Easter message that we're talking about, being good news people, this is the good news that God is with us and for us. And we, individually and collectively, are the soils in this story. And so, as we're thinking about this value of a growing life, the question we're really wrestling with today is, what type of soil are we? How is God's work in our life being received? And is it not really growing? Nothing's really happening? Or is it producing this miraculous crop, this thing that only God can do in our life? That's what we're going to try to figure out today, because we are participants in whether or not God transforms our lives. It's how God's chosen to work. God does not control us. God is not coercive. God is not force anything on us. But in God's love, God shows up and brings us good news. And we have to decide, will we choose it? Will we respond to it? And that's where change begins to happen in our life. And so the parable starts off with this path, right? It says that there's a path in the field and the seed ends up on it. This is not a how-to about farming. Let's be clear. This was a culture of farming like we live here. I always say the good thing about living in Chesterton is you're never more than 5 minutes from a cornfield. We know the smell of the earth, even if we never touch it. Like, I'm not planting anything, but I live right near a farm. I drive past it all the time, and I can smell the cows, and I can smell the earth, and I see the corn. Right? This is part of our life. And the culture Jesus lived in was very much an agrarian culture, because if you didn't grow it, you didn't need it. So they knew that this was not an example of good farming, but that actually really helped the message. Jesus said that there were these paths in the field, so you'd probably be at the edge of the field, and that some of the seed would fall on there. And of course, nothing happened to it because it had been stepped on so long, it was so hard. No seed could possibly root in that. And being exposed to the elements and the weather, the birds would swoop in and take it. And this seed was essentially wasted. That's how people would have heard this. Man, if you just took your seed and threw it on the path, it's like trying to plant in our parking lot. What a waste. But Jesus is surrounded by crowds in this moment. He's been going from town to town, and people are excited that that God is doing something, or that there's some sort of movement going on, and they're following him. But Jesus is looking at the crowds and knowing that even as he speaks good news to them, for a vast number of them, it's like throwing seed on the path. Now, why is that? What sort of life functions this way? And this is the hard reality, all of our lives. From the moment we are born, the world is stepping on us so that we are unaware of or we will not participate in God's work in our life. There are things that work far beyond us that make it really hard to pay attention to God's work in our life. And they're big, and the Bible uses words like principalities and powers, and it talks about evil at work. Like these are big things at work, but the default setting of our life is to be resistant to transformation in God's kingdom. Now that shows up in lots of different ways, and some of those are like big things, right? Like suffering, death, injury, tragedy, injustice, violence, hatred. Those things harden us. But then personally, there's this stuff that the Bible usually refers to as sin, that are choices we made, things that are broken within us that we cling to, that we build our life around, that we build habits and malformed behaviors, and they become a way that we're hardened against God's love for us. And so as Jesus is looking out at the crowds, he's looking at it and going, knows the majority of people that are literally listening to God in the flesh speak are actually resistant to. Their lives have been hardened against the good news God is offering them. And I think this is what we discover with when we try to change ourselves, is that there's a lot of stuff to overcome. And then if you start getting into like, therapy and stuff, you're like, oh man, I don't want to go to that part of me. I don't want to realize that part that's broken of me. I don't want to realize actually the parts of me that are so desperate for transformation, that need to be healed. Because if I look at them, I'm going to know I can't do anything about them. So the good news Jesus is offering us is, despite the fact we have been born into a world that hardens us against God's presence, God's love, and God's work within us, if we will have faith, if we will believe, if we will trust the evidence of God's love that we find in Jesus, that is the first step to overcoming all of these things we can never overcome on our own. Jesus says, have faith, trust in me, believe in the good news I'm telling you. If you just step out in that faith and that trust, that will be the act of beginning to cultivate change in your life. Because what you're having faith in is not yourself, but God and God's love. So if in that moment, when we hear this good news, we look at all of the evidence and say, yep, I can't do it, but you make that leap of faith and say, but maybe God can. This is the beginning of change and transformation within us. It's not about us. It's going to require God for us to change. So there's step one in that process for us. And that can be a really big step, right? To make that leap of faith, especially when we go through suffering and difficulties in the world, which is partly why when we talk about our mission statement as a church of cultivating God's wholeness in a broken world, we know that if people are being hardened and there's suffering and there's injustice and there's brokenness around them, if they don't receive an alternative to that, if they don't find a group of people who believe and have been changed by God and are doing something now about that to bring good news to other people, it's really hard to believe God is with them and for them. But when we make that step out and we become the sowers, now faith becomes possible for that. So there's the first soil, rocky path, the hardened soil. Then we come into the rocky path. Now, this one it probably makes more sense for us when you've been growing or you're working in a garden or tilling up some land. And then there's just rocks. And some fields just seem to grow rocks. It doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, I know there's actual geological reasons why the frost and it pushes rocks up or whatever, but sometimes it just feels like we're growing rocks. And that soil where the seed gets in, it starts to grow a little bit, gets some roots, starts to pop up, but there's just not enough of it so that when the weather comes or it changes or the wind blows in, that it won't die and get washed away. And Jesus says, yeah, this is the soil that the roots don't get down enough and it's not watered enough. It doesn't have what it needs to grow. And so that new life gets choked out. As a pastor who've been working with people for the last 25 plus years, right? I probably could come up with 1,000 names of people I have seen with joy accept the fact that God loves them, start to get excited about what God is doing, maybe joining a church, getting involved in a ministry, doing something, and then just watching it disappear. It grieves me every time. But the reality is, once we make that step of faith into following God, then we have to start looking at our own life and we got to dig out some rocks. We have to come to terms with what we have in our life that will not allow God's love to grow within us. And that's hard work. That's why Jesus describes the process of following him as dying, because there's parts of ourselves we have to die to. We have to surrender. We have to give up in order for something new to be born. But if we don't die to it, then this new life gets choked out. Jesus then says there's soil that has a bit more to it. Things grow in it all the time, and it's great, except it's not just the seed that grows there. The weeds and the thorns grow as well. This is why I don't garden. One word, weeds. That's it. That's the only word. It's just weeds. I'll be honest with you. I just don't want to fight the battle. Like the idea of like planting and like nurturing something and let it grow in sounds cool. Doing the work to keep the other stuff from growing in there and choking it out and the pests and other things, I don't want to do it. That's just my confession. God bless you, all you people who bring us produce and grow our food for us. I just don't want to do it. But our a lot of our lives are like this. They have other things growing up in them. So we can be, this is the hard truth. We can be pursuing God and find that God's love means something to us and it can start to change us and we can be excited about it and we can be worshiping and doing all this stuff and there still be things that are not of God growing up alongside of all of that. And at some point, the other things begin to choke out God's work within us. That's ugly. That's hard. And the really hard part about it, the number one thing Jesus names, like by far, the number one thing Jesus names, and this is something we don't like in the American church to talk about, is money. Right? He even names it specifically in the issues here. The seed that fell among the thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches, and pleasures, and they do not mature. The number one complaint about the church in America is money. It's money. We do not want to reckon with living in an economy, a global economy, all these things where some prosper and others suffer, especially when we're the ones prospering. We don't want to reckon with it. And yet it's the thing. There's over 2,000 verses in this book, in this library, that talk specifically about this and its threat to God's work in our life. Whatever else you think is an issue, by far, the thing God talks about the most is money. And if we do not wrestle with and surrender to God and give that part of our life over to God, it will always choke out the fruit God's trying to bring into our life. So there's a bunch of bad news. You feel good now? That felt like that first. That felt like the finger. Like, great, thanks. Okay, feeling good about all those soils, right? So then Jesus describes good soil, and the soil is so good that it's miraculous. Once again, not a farmer, but I know planting a crop and having it grow 100-fold over what was planted, really good math. That's some good farm math. And not the type, the people hearing this story would have gone, I'm sorry, did he just say 100-fold? That's not real. I know, I've been planting my whole life. You don't get 100-fold yield. That's how good the good news of God's kingdom is. God can do the impossible in our lives. There is a fruitfulness and a purpose and a healing and a joy and a wholeness that are so far beyond anything we could hope for or plan because it's what God does in us. So that sounds great. What does that soil do? What does that look like? I did some work thinking about, reading on, listening to people talk about all of the elements of good soil. Because when I look at soil, I mainly have a technical term for it. It's called dirt. And there's like, well, that's a different, I mean, that dirt looks different than the other dirt. Do I know how to describe the dirt of one versus another? No. But there are important elements that make dirt different, right? First, there's the loam, right? The balance of what types of soil are mixed in there. If you just have sand, you get a desert and nothing grows. If you just have clay, this is what we had lived in North Carolina, there's red clay. Man, even growing grass was a pain. I just started mulching everything. I just gave up because it's just really hard to grow in that. But if you have a mix between the sand and the clay and the loose dirt, you find something, a soil that the seed can penetrate, but then it has something to grab hold of also. You just have to have the right mixture of that. You gotta have the right amount of moisture, right? It has to be able to retain moisture, but also not too much, because then it will drown out. You have to have aeration, right? They got to come and put the holes in your yard. Why is that? You got to have freedom. Got to be able to move. The roots get bound up. You have to be able to spread out and grow. You got to have the right sort of nutrients. And what are the nutrients? Well, most of the nutrients are stuff that's died that then got mixed in. So the new life is being fed by the old life that happened. Then you get on a real small level the microbes, the microbial life. This is all the unseen stuff that, science and like there's stuff growing and doing stuff. And I wasted my time. I studied things like Latin and ancient Greek in school. I know nothing about all of these things, but there are microbes in there, I promise you. And some of you can explain them to us, but they bring life to the soil, help things grow. Sunlight, and you need time. See, some things grow fast, but some things grow at the speed of trees. Very different. And so as we're thinking about all of those elements for the good soil of our life, it's not just for us personally, but for us as a community. It's like, what can we do to cultivate an environment where the good news can really grow within us? Well, I do think that the loam, that's really a great way of thinking about community, because we need to have a community to be part of. Like this transformation, the good news of it is you are not supposed to be able to do this on your own. The good news is by joining in with God's kingdom, you've been welcomed into the family of God. And so you need a community that it's easy to be part of. This was what we talked about last week, the welcoming all, radical hospitality. There's always an open door, but it also has got to be a little sticky so you don't just get washed out the back door. People have to know your name, and we have to surrender to and give ourselves over to actually being in relationship with other people. Crazy idea. If we do not, if we live in isolation, we have hard capped the transformation we will ever see in our life. Because if the purpose of our faith is to love God and love other people, it requires the actually loving of other people, which is up close and personal and embodied. It's not distant and abstract. We need lots of water. Jesus describes himself as the living water. And we need to saturate our life with the presence of God to really know and participate in the fact that God is with us and for us at all times. We do need freedom. We need freedom to grow, freedom from control. This is one of our values we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks as a church, but we really value the fact that we are not setting up a community where pastors are in charge of what happens here. You know this because you're still here with us, right? But we're cultivators, we're catalysts, but we all share equally in our life as a church. And so there has to be a freedom for each of us to figure out what God is doing, to participate in it, and to pursue that. That's a requirement for it. We need the nutrients of death. I can certainly testify that in my own life, the places I have grown the most have come from having died to something else, having given up something God asked me to give up and surrendered it. And that became what fueled the growth the next season. We have the unseen work of the Spirit that unites us. This is the mysterious part. This is the takes a leap of faith part, because although I've never seen the wind, I've felt it. I've seen evidence of the wind at work. And that's how Jesus describes the Spirit of God at work within us. You can't see it, but you can feel it and you know its effect. And our shared life together here is driven by the Spirit of God, the breath of God at work, blowing in amidst our lives. Yeah, sunlight, you can call that God. That's easy to play about. The sun, the presence of God, glory. But I think a big part of it is learning God's pace. Because some growth is dramatic and feels quick, but most of the growth I've known in God has moved at the speed of trees. I feel like right now in my life, I'm experiencing the answers to prayers I prayed decades ago. Of, hey, God, I would like to mature in this way, or hey, God, I'd like to figure this out, or hey, I'd like to surrender that. And God's like, great, let's get on that. And as I approach 50, God's like, you're starting to see that sprout. Remember, we talked about that when you were 15. God moves at the speed of trees sometimes, what this looks like. And so if we will surrender ourselves to God's plan, what we will discover is that the soil of our life will become a fertile place for God to work and to change us. That something beautiful can happen. Matter of fact, not just something beautiful, something miraculous, 100-fold, far beyond what our dreams and plans are. God can do something way bigger than that. But it starts with us having that leap of faith and trusting in Jesus's way. There was another parable Jesus told about two paths. One was a broad path and one was narrow. And Jesus said that life in his kingdom required us to walk the narrow path. And it may seem mean because narrow seems like, well, not many people are invited on that. That's not the point. Everyone's invited on the narrow path. It's not narrow because it's limited to who can be on it. It's specific. It's not what everybody else does. It's not choose your own adventure. It's Jesus' way. And if we walk that path, the end is assured. And so here we are, seeking the cultivation of transformation in our life. And so I'm going to invite you to do something this morning that maybe you didn't know you were going to do. I'm going to invite you to spend a couple minutes doing some cultivating right now. And I've got some helpers with some sheets in the back. I think Ava and Sid and some others are. They're going to come and start passing out papers amongst you. And just go for it, start passing those out. And on these sheets of paper, there are descriptions of the four soils with some reflection. You can hold the music real quick, Luna. Descriptions of the soils and some questions, some prayers, something to get started. I'm going to invite you to take the leap of faith this morning of doing some cultivating right now. Take 4 minutes of reading and reflection and prayer, and begin to see if maybe God begins to. You can go ahead and start passing out sheets. Ava, come on, go for it. Thank you. And see what God has for you in this. Because the beautiful thing is, the good news of God, that the seed is so good that even this morning, your path to transformation can begin. And it doesn't matter if it's a brand new path or one you've been on for a long time. If we will just surrender to it this morning, that can begin. So I'm going to give you this time for the next 4 minutes. We're going to play some music, and I'm going to let you pray and work through that. And then we'll come and join at the table. All right. All right, Luna, you can play that music now.